Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Aka Yangaka. I'll be the moderator for this session. Today's topic is based on a series of articles that were recently published in Science, and they're focused on examining barriers to Black underrepresentation in physics and potential models for change. The topic is the missing physicist. A summary of these articles is provided in your handout if you pick them on your way in. And of course, online, if you're joining us on Zoom, there's a link that is provided in the chat. And before I dive into the introductions, I want to take this opportunity to point out three acronyms that will be, that maybe some people will not be familiar with. We'll be using URM, which stands for Underrepresented Racial Minority, and HBCU, which is Historically Black Colleges and Universities, and PWI, which stands for Primarily White Institutions. With that said, please everyone join me in welcoming our panelists. From left is Mr. Zach Hall. Zach is a graduate student here in the Department of Physics and Astronomy, and he's the founder of the URM Graduate to Undergraduate Mentoring Program, which is actually described in Article 3 of the article package. Next to Mr. Zach is Dr. Jennifer Weinberg-Wolf. Dr. Jennifer is an Associate Director of Undergraduate Studies in our department and the leader of undergraduate advising. Next, we have Dr. Sheila Kenapan. Dr. Sheila is Associate Chair for Diversity and Mentoring in our department and founder of the Computational Bootcamp. This is also described in Article 3. Next to Dr. Sheila is Dr. Kent Wallace. Dr. Kent is Dean of Graduate Studies and Discipline Coordinator of Physics at Fisk University. He's also an expert in educational and social science research with roles in multiple HBCU and PWI partnership. Next to Dr. Kent is Dr. Roy Clark. Dr. Roy is a professor at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and is the founder of the highly successful Applied Physics Graduate Program, which is described in Article 5. Last but not the least is Dr. Mohammed Ahmed. Dr. Mohammed is an intern associate dean of the College of Health and Sciences at the North Carolina Central University. And he's the founder of a new multi-way HBCU PWI partnership to provide undergraduate traineeship at the Triangle University's Nuclear Lab, where he's also the associate director. Prior to this meeting, we had assigned all the panelists a number of these articles to read. So at this point, I'll be asking them to make brief comments on this. We'll begin with Mr. Zach. Mr. Zach, please.
Hi. With data going back to the 1990s, we saw that the number of degrees being awarded in physics has tripled in total, but for Black students, that number has remained largely stagnant. Making up a decreasing percentage of those degrees. At the graduate level, that number is even lower, with only 1% of the physics PhDs in 2019 being awarded to Black students. From my perspective, experiences in undergrad, it was clear to see that the lack of representation in the department where I was often the only Black student in my classes, and I felt isolated because of it. It was very hard without mentoring, and I felt like I was just a number floundering in a sea of students. Luckily, I met a professor who told me about the APS Bridge program, which provided excellent formal mentoring during my master's at Cal State Long Beach and now at UNC through the Computational Astronomy and Physics Bootcamp and from faculty mentors. Realizing how important mentoring is, I wanted to give back by making extra efforts to connect with and get to know my students through my duties as a teaching assistant. But during my summers at UNC, I acted as a physics teaching assistant in a science enrichment program for racially underrepresented college students pursuing careers in the health and medical fields. Yet it was the summer of 2020 that I decided that I had reached a critical point and decided that I wanted to play a more active role in mentoring by creating a program where graduate students of color would act as mentors to racially underrepresented students in our department. In the same year, the American Institute of Physics published the results of the Team Up report, and we have used that as a guide for planning and executing our program. The grad to undergrad program focuses on a holistic approach to mentoring by implementing the key factors from the Team Up report. We provide personal support, connect mentees to academic resources, help to build their physics identity, and work to promote a sense of belonging. We have 6 undergraduate mentees, 7 graduate student mentors and program planners, and 4 faculty advisors. It is our goal to help take some of the luck out of finding quality mentoring, which we see as such a precious resource.
Hello. So Article 2 describes the reaction of the dominant majority to concerns about racism against Black students as an issue of not me or not my colleagues, not my time, not my field right now. And so I'm here as an undergraduate advisor, and I want to share that, yes, it's here now, and it's actually everywhere. The stories and things that I'm sharing are not my own experiences, but I'm going to try to honestly combine them and talk about what I've heard from current and recent students. One common theme is that the experience in the classroom is just different depending on what you look like. Faculty are unconsciously setting a tone that's passed down to our students as well. Whose questions are worthy of a full answer, or who gets a brief answer and is brushed off and doesn't get a lot of details. If you don't carefully plan out ahead of time exactly how much you want to answer for specific questions, unconscious bias will indefinitely creep in. And that means that there's an environment where there are some people who are uncomfortable asking for help, both of their instructors as well as their peers. That means that certain students move through classes invisible and they're left out of the collaborative learning process. They're not invited to study sessions, they're graded differently in group work, and professors make assumptions about those students. These are all examples that the article discusses about gatekeeping, preventing access for some that's currently occurring in our classes. These problems extend beyond the classroom interactions and how advisors and mentors make assumptions about what Black students can achieve. They may be more likely to be advised to do a BA degree rather than a BS degree, possibly to switch majors, or generally assumed to have less preparation and not be able to catch up, making it seem like the students are intrinsically deficient compared to other students. And the situation is even more fraught when we consider intersectionality and the experiences of our Black female students and what they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis in the classroom.
Computational Astronomy and Physics, or CAP boot camp here at UNC, which was discussed in Article 3, was designed to address some of the issues that Jen just described. CAP started as an REU, but is now a boot camp because I found the REU was helping people who were already going to succeed. Unlike an REU, the boot camp serves UNC students, often first generation, low income and diverse, and there are no applications, just faculty nominations to help me find diamonds in the rough who deserve a break. It's got a short 2-week duration to enable summer school or summer jobs. And the content is research skills to open doors for future opportunities. It's self-paced to meet everyone where they're at. There's no fixed start or end point. And it's learning for learning's sake, which means the participants feel included in a small community that includes undergrads, post-baccalaureates, and grad students. How does this help? CAP is an antidote to gatekeeping. It's helping students who might not otherwise be encouraged. Maybe URMs, maybe they don't even know they should apply for things, started physics late, or maybe missed the REU window and they're already post-baccalaureates. They might have long working hours that hurt their grades, or they might have to work in summer. CAP is also an antidote to the deficit model, the idea that a student is not good enough if they're not succeeding. Wherever a student is at is good enough for us. If they have the interest, we work with them from where they are. CAP is also a recruiting tool for URM grad students. For example, Zach Hall, helping them get off to a strong start. To close, I just want to connect the dots to point out that diversifying our graduate program is having a positive effect on our undergraduates. Since 2016, our graduate students have gone from about 1% to about 5% African American, with work on admissions protocols, first-year advising, flexible academic plans, and participating in the APS Bridge Partnership. Grad student diversification is a faster way to create URM mentors than faculty diversification, and grad mentors are often more approachable for undergraduates. Access to URM grad mentors also levels the playing field for URM undergrads who might experience gatekeeping from other potential mentors.
So the three articles that I was looking at was white privilege, fixing the system, but not the students, and Black colleges cannot do it all. In the first of white privilege and how it plays into where are the physicists, particularly of color, one of the people interviewed by the name of April Hadari referred to the senior tenured white males of these departments as the priesthood. And clearly that was not meant as a compliment. It was as though they were the gatekeepers that made the decisions as to what diversity is going to be brought into their programs or what was not. In the second article, they talked about when it's fixed the system and not the students, they were talking about how the problem of the lack of diversity is not rooted in the students that are being selected, but so much of the system that they have to go into. And when we think about that, there are programs that are trying to reimagine how these students are selected and how to work with these students, such as the Fisk-Vanderbilt program, the Fisk University and Vanderbilt Bridge program, Master's to PhD program, that was highlighted in this article as a mechanism of how to look at how to select students and ensure their success. Primarily, based in new thoughts of mentorship and treating the whole student. And then when you look at the last article, Black colleges can't do it all. Though the majority of Blacks in the country go to majority institutions, it's the HBCUs that are turning out the majority of its graduates with degrees. But in spite of that fact, the HBCUs that have this nurturing environment for students to ensure their success, you cannot fill the void by this alone. Now, as I collectively look at all three of these, we realize that one, there needs to be a culture change where there is not a gatekeeper making the decisions as to what, who's coming in and who gets out, what they must look like and what they must participate in. Programs need to reevaluate and have an inward look to see how is it that they are selecting and what am I doing to contribute to this lack of diversity, be it based on gender and or race. And thirdly, when it comes to, the HBCUs can't do it all. There needs to be a change in the way that we look at the HBCUs and how they interact with the majority institutions. Too many times grants are submitted for partnerships with minority serving institutions and the matter of race is strictly treated as a checkbox issue. Oh, we have some people of color. Oh, we have some women, we've done our job. That will never change the problem. There must be individuals that are involved in this process at the minority serving institutions, at the PWIs, that truly have a passion and an understanding of the importance and the positive aspects of a diverse graduate and undergraduate program so that all can contribute to scientific discovery and broaden participation throughout the scientific community.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk about the fifth article in the science series, which describes how the University of Michigan came up with a new vision for graduate training and collaboration on an interdisciplinary scale, and has led to some success in attracting underrepresented students. When the U of M formed its applied physics program, so graduate program, more than 30 years ago. We started with a unique vision, which turned out actually to have some profound and somewhat unexpected implications for addressing the appalling lack of diversity in the field of physics. Our initial goal actually was to connect the physics department with the rest of the campus. We're in a large research university and have a lot of connections to other departments through physics, but that wasn't really being used and developed to its fullest extent. So as you know, physics is a central discipline in science. It connects to a vast range of other disciplines, including engineering, healthcare, public policy, many other things. And by harnessing the inherent interdisciplinarity of physics, we found almost accidentally a way to bring in underrepresented students off the bench, as Shirley Malcolm would like to say, students who weren't previously involved in the physics enterprise, bring them off the bench into eventually successful research careers. So we were addressing this problem by going outwards from the department rather than trying to change the culture within inwards within a department. We're reaching out to the diaspora of physics on campus, and there are roughly 3 times more faculty with physics PhDs out there in the surrounding units of our campus than there are actually in the physics department itself. So this presented a wonderful opportunity and a resource for graduate training and collaborative research. And that's the way that we came across a way to bring in more diverse students. And there's a lot of interest in those areas that I've just mentioned, which use physics. So now intellectual diversity does not equate to social diversity. So there's something extra that's required. And what that is basically a motivation to harness this interdisciplinarity by finding out what each student can contribute to the enterprise and bring that out and put it into a new area where physics has not been used before. This is enormously attractive to underrepresented graduate students, we found. And with that, I'm going to pass on to my colleague here.
Thank you, Roy. And thank you for the organizers for hosting this wonderful webinar and the day of discussions at UNC Chapel Hill. So I'm going to briefly give my remarks on Articles 3 and 4, which address the question on who is responsible for the education of minority students. And I'm going to speak broadly, not just racial diversity, but from all perspectives. And why HBCUs cannot themselves carry on the burden of educating Black students. Having said that, I kind of almost disagree with the entire title of the Missing Black Physicists, because the word missing assumes that you had something and a possession of, which is missing now. Well, we never had possession of the crowd we are looking for. It's a human resource. It's an undiscovered resource, which we have not mined yet. So how could it be missing? And you know the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. So this pointing of finger that who's responsible for the education of Black physicists, PWI or HBCUs or MSIs or whatever, that discussion itself is meaningless, because unless there's a positive reinforcement of the entire community, which is needed to raise the child which is Black, a child which identifies as an LGBTQ+, a child which is different than every other child in school, a child which suffers from mental behavioral challenges, socioeconomic situations, poverty. All of this matters. Diversity does not mean multiplicity. Equity does not mean equality. And inclusion does not mean that you have to exclude certain people to bring in the inclusion you want to include. With only 10% of Black population, 10%, less than 10%, who actually enroll in HBCUs. When we go to funding agencies and we talk about how HBCUs can make a difference, here comes the PWI says, well, we graduate more Black students than you do. That's actually not true. Only 10% of Black population enrolls in HBCUs, but for the case of physics, they overwhelmingly graduate more physicists than any PWI. Let me give you an example, and you'll be embarrassed to look at these numbers. 5 years between 2012 and 2017, MIT graduated how many undergraduate students of color? Any guess? 12. 12. So is it a question of resources? Certainly MIT has all the resources it needs. By the way, in 2017, Morehouse only graduated 8, which is almost a little less than 80% of what MIT has done in 5 years. So it's not the question of resources. It's the question of that community, that positive reinforcement you can provide. Example of Morehouse I just gave. Why did it work? Why would Morehouse be more successful in producing Black physicists? It is a question which we discussed earlier with some of the students here. Do you feel like belonging to these hallways? Do you walk, when you walk these hallways, can you identify with the professors you see in the hallway? Can you identify with your lecturers? Can you identify with your staff? Can you even identify with your peers? Is it that uncommon to run into another gay person in your hallways as it is elsewhere? Is it as unlikely to see an African-American person in the hallways of physics department here as it is elsewhere? Somebody watching the game, we're not about to bring about the game here, but let's not talk about the championship. Let's talk about the Final Four. Somebody says, did you notice that only Black folks were on the court? You look in the crowd all around you, you don't see that representation which is in the court. Why? And where are you going to point that finger? Who's going to take that blame? That is the question. So instead of, and so these changes don't come about just from recruitment, just somebody going out and speaking to school with majority Black students and trying to enroll, trying to bring students here, trying to have more population. All of that works. But what you need is institutional capacity. This institution needs to have that as part of its strategic plan, that we will make these grounds fertile and welcoming to the students of somebody needs to be muting. Xavier, mute.
It's me, and I'm trying to talk.
Xavier, mute. Okay, I'm sorry.
I think the moderator is trying to speak.
All right, so I'm going to wrap this up saying that we have a new program, which is a collaboration between HBCUs and with colleagues here like at UNC Chapel Hill, which is promoting partnership of African-American and students of color to gain real collaborative research experience between us and them, to enable those relationships which Ken talked about to bear fruit and bring real conversations and real students in your hallways. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, and thank you, everyone. It's a very wonderful opening statement. Now we'll move to next section. In this session, we'll be asking the panelists to answer 2 questions that the committee got together and presented. So the questions will be on energizing the majority and achieving structural changes and lasting progress. We'll start with the energizing majority. Now, I will just read out the question as it was phrased. The question is, in leading efforts to create opportunities and a welcoming environment for Black students, as opposed to just contributing an hour here or there, we see other marginalized groups stepping up, but almost never the straight white males that numerically dominate physics. So the question is, what can make this group care about physics representation in physics and abandon the deficit model? What personal interactions, structural incentives, or motivators or other motivators have you seen or could you imagine in energizing those who have never experienced marginalization to make changing the culture of physics a daily work priority? Now, this question goes to Dr. Clark, Dr. Kent, and Dr. Jennifer Weinberg-Wolf. We'll start with Dr. Clark.
Thank you. So I already mentioned the approach that we've taken at Michigan, which is basically to go outwards beyond the department in an interdisciplinary sense to create opportunities for training and research collaborations for our graduate students. And energizing the majority here for us means reaching out and making those connections which physics is so good at doing and has been so successful at doing. So that's the first point I want to make is the majority needs a kind of self-interest. People are driven very largely by self-interest. How can I make my research group stronger? How can I get better students? These are the advantages of doing interdisciplinary research and attracting a broader range of graduate students to campus. This needed to be proved on the actual ground by success in recruiting students through this mechanism. And that indeed has occurred. And the proof of the pudding now is in the demand for these interdisciplinary kinds of students who are studying physics. So that's how we envision energizing the majority, the 150 PhDs who are doing physics and physics-related research in other departments. And now our program is embedded in a traditional physics department. And it's a good question to ask, what impact did this program have on the physics department itself? And you probably will not be surprised to learn that that impact was not as great as it could have been within the department, but outside in the broader world where physics is being done on the rest of the campus has had a huge impact and a very positive impact. It's really priceless. So those are the things. Good things have happened within the physics department. A DEI committee has been formed. a fellowship program to bridge students into the PhD program, and a number of other good things. But the major impact has been outwards rather than inwards, and that's been our experience. So I'll wrap it up there and pass on to the next person.
Thank you, Dr.
I
Clark.
assume that that's me. When I looked at this question, I'm just going to be very transparent with you. I could come up with no other answer that says, when it says, what can make this group care about Black representation in physics and abandon their deficit model? And the only answer I could come up with is, you don't need to be asking me that. You need to ask them. I don't know what it means to be a white male professor, to have the power to keep people out of a program and hide it in a bias of, well, they just don't have the qualifications or they don't fit our model. I say you need to ask them. What I do know is that there are things that can be done to change perspectives, and that changing perspectives is, if the research in this country is done with the taxpayers' money, and it was a professor at Florida A&M that pointed this out, and I couldn't help but get it out of my mind. If all people pay taxes, including people of color and women, then their tax money is going into the universities that fund the research of these universities. And if they want to play lip service to diversity, then research agencies need to not fund those programs that look at their programs and see token checkbox issues or checkbox measures and not things that are substantive. Because if you want diversity and you continue to fund programs that are not really trying to do anything, then you're basically tacitly agreeing with it. Now, I'm sure that perspective might make a lot of people upset, but the fact of the matter is this. If you're using taxpayer money for research and that taxes comes from all representations of that United States, then all participants in the United States have a right to be a part of that research. Be their gender, their ethnic, spiritual, orientation, background, they are all participants into the revenue that makes this nation what it is. And therefore, the priesthood, you have not right to exclude people from it. Now, not everything that I say is rooted in something that is so passionate, or it might seem that I'm upset about it, but I tend to get it. But now, practically, what things can be done? Well, one, it's relationships, it's partnerships, and it's dialogue. It's having institutions, people of color, people of different genders and orientations at the table of the decision-making progress, and having a willingness to have the uncomfortable conversations. The willingness to have the uncomfortable conversations, because why is the conversations uncomfortable? Because in many cases, those conversations are going to have an individual take an introspective look and ask, what am I doing that contributes to this very problem? And that's not easy. One of my best friends one time said, Kent, you have privilege. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm Black, I'm going through it. What privilege have I got? She said, did you notice that the server that came over to us only spoke to you when they asked what we wanted to eat? And I didn't notice. Server came right back. So what will you all be having? And she looked directly at me and I was so embarrassed. I couldn't deny what she was talking about. And I said, well, you might want to also ask her too. And it took me to acknowledge and introspect and look and realize the privilege that I have before I could ever do anything to address it. And so I believe that we need to start having these uncomfortable conversations. I believe that the PWIs, or the primarily white institutions, need to have the HSIs and the HBCUs at the table as equal partners in collaborations for research, rather than we've got all the money and you're working with us. I believe that the HBCUs need to be the lead institutions in collaborating, because the research shows that scientific identity is one of the strongest factors of a person being successful as a participant in science. And I have to say this before I forget, my class who had to be rescheduled because I'm here said, give a shout out to us. Hello class, shout out to you. Kept my promise, don't kill me when I get back. But I really do have to say that if you have an opportunity to speak to power and have a seat at the table, and we talk about these issues that are so important, you have the opportunity to move the needle. And I am optimistic because the very fact that we're sitting here at UNC in light of recent events that took place concerning tenure suggests that there, and I've said this earlier today, if a university doesn't want to address something, trust me, they won't. So the fact that we're even here suggests that there is something that positive can be moved forward. And I hope that more universities want to take part in that, because we are out of slavery fewer years than slavery existed. And clearly we're still having these conversations, so there's much to be done. But I do have optimism that it is possible.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. I appreciate that. Dr. Weinberg?
So I'll be brief because I can't build too much. I was thinking very similar things. And I want to focus on how we can improve and continue to have the conversation, to have the dialogue, to have people come together and talk. And I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to focus on the micro interactions. We need to have people, how are we going to energize people? Is when they learn more about each other. And when we can, as a community of scholars together, start having some empathy for each other and learning about each other. And that means stopping and thinking about other people's perspective, doing that introspective work and thinking about how whatever you say to another individual, how that individual hears what you're saying as well. And it doesn't have to be the large table conversations. It's also the individual interactions in the hallway, in the classroom, in your office hours. People have, I would like to think, in the best of intentions for the most part and want to do better. They just don't necessarily always know how. And some of that is learning to listen and think about how somebody else hears what you're saying. And so, when you have a student that comes to ask you a question and wants to learn and is there and trying hard, if your first response is, did you read the book? Because you then want to know, what have they learned and where is their question? It can be seen as, wait, you're assuming that I haven't done the work. Why are you asking if I've read the book? And if we can just take these micro moments and twist them to say, tell me what you've learned, tell me what you need, where are you and how can I meet you there? We can then all move forward together, hopefully.
Thank you. Now we move on to the next question. But before that, I just want to remind the audience that the whole point of this meeting section here is for us to come up with questions that will be discussed in the third part of this section. So if you have questions, please put them either in the Q&A section, or if you are in the live audience, there's a URL on the whiteboard behind the panelists. You can go there and type your questions and then they will be answered right there. So to the next question now, it's about achieving structural change and lasting progress. And this question goes to Mr. Hall, Dr. Kenepan, and Dr. Mohammed Ahmed. The question is, what have you seen or would you wish to see in terms of structural changes, institutional financial partnerships that can replace isolated, overburdened, transient champions for Black students with lasting incentives for progress and collaborative work on ongoing solutions between Black students, faculty, and allies and institutions? What difference have you seen between the approach that work and those that have failed? Mr. Zach, please.
Okay, thanks. I think this question really gets to the heart of the issue. Typically, you have one or two front runners in DEI work, and it's impossible for them to execute every single initiative that they want to get to. So I found this even from my personal experience with working with other graduate students to run grad to undergrad. It requires a significant amount of planning and work. And from a student perspective, I think providing financial support would help alleviate some of the stress that we face with managing this kind of program. As PhD students, we are here for research, and that is our main focus. But depending on your funding situation, you may have to teach classes in addition to any research duties that you have. So one way to free up some time for DEI work, a student can be partially funded specifically for this. And I can say from experience that as the most experienced TA in the course that I teach, which has added responsibilities because of that, along with grad to undergrad, being busy is an understatement. So currently we have a program that provides some financial support. It's called the DEI Scholars Program, but its resources are time limited and available only for 1 year. So I think longer term support for this kind of work would be helpful from a student perspective and reinforce the idea that DEI work is important for the entire department.
All right, I'll jump in. I recently heard from a colleague about the National Optical and Infrared Laboratory having 3% of their employees' time for DEI activities and having DEI work as a competency in annual evaluations for employees. And that I think is fantastic. I think we need that everywhere, accountability. That counteracts the so-called black tax that was talked about in the articles, which is really a BIPOC tax. It's basically underrepresented groups having to step up in uncompensated ways. At UNC, we have had something else that I think works as a systematic change, which is to kind of try to make the entire department a committee of the whole with respect to DEI work. So we do have a formal diversity committee, but we also created a Slack where we have grassroots efforts that bubble up all the time, often from students. And my job as associate chair for diversity is really just to help them connect with other people with similar interests and help shepherd those efforts through. I think that can be very effective. Another thing that has made it effective is that our chair explicitly endorsed those activities and said, sent out an email to the whole department saying, hey, advisors, please support your grad students and your undergrads to get involved. That said, I totally agree with Zach that effort cannot always be for free. And that brings me to what I would wish to see for institutional change. We need permanent institutional or donor-funded, donor-based funding for DEI efforts. Right now, most of it is on a shoestring, if not on zero money. So for example, the CAP boot camp that I described, it is very insecure. It's on my personal research grant because there is no NSF category into which, into which such a program would fit. And so it's been on again, off again over the years as I've been able to rustle up funding for it. The GTU program has no permanent funding. That's the grad to undergrad mentoring program that Zach started in our department. And that, again, there's a little bit of money this year in its initial year because of a DEI Scholar Award, but the DEI Scholar program that he described that we're trying to start is also just on a new faculty member's startup, Julietta Grushko's startup money. So none of this is secure. All of it is temporary and shoestring. We really need the institution and or donors to step up to make these programs permanent. And that's really a problem with the NSF and other federal funding agencies. When they come to diversity programs, they always want to start things, but they don't want to provide maintenance money. They don't want to help see things through for the long haul. You can't always be starting things. Sometimes you have to maintain things. You have to have institutional memory. You have to provide money for staff so that efforts that are started and energized by students can carry through to the next generation of students. That's what I would like to see.
Thank you. And Mohammed, if you're answering the
All
question.
right,
please.
so I will try to add a bit to what others have said on this topic. So the reason why me and Kent are sitting here together is because of the investments, Sheila talked about. We were both part of a program by NSF in which we spent 1 year together, actually, traveling across the US, learning what works in STEM leadership and what doesn't. And one thing we learned is academic leadership can be framed into 4 corners, which includes structural, which is mentioned here, human resource, political, and symbolic. These are so-called 4 frames of academic leadership. Those of you interested in pursuing that topic for future research. But structural component, which we are discussing here, is the most critical one. And it only comes from one place, and that place is the leadership. As a faculty member, as a student, even as a chair, you're not part of that structural piece. That structural piece comes top down. Your president, your provost, your deans, that is the part which is critical, and that's where the investment is needed. That we need to empower more faculty to reach those ranks who are vested in these ideas. Not only that, it is our responsibility that if UNC Physics or any other physics department wants to or is interested in as their strategic plan to grow in these directions, that we want to see a Black female physicist at UNC Chapel Hill Physics Department. What is it that we need to make this, or what would it take to make that as part of our strategic plan? What conversations we need to have with our deans? What conversations, what do we need to push to the provosts, to the presidents, that this is what UNC Chapel Hill needs? That if we go out to recruitment, we need these role models, as Ken mentioned, that role model, the connection you can have with that faculty is critical. Funding is absolutely critical. Investment is absolutely critical. You need to put your buck down where it demands. That's one of the articles which I read mentioned is, the reason why Morehouse was successful, the reason Fisk model is successful, because you have made investments into it. That's what, the grant which I wrote, which Kent is part of, it does. It brings in, more than $500,000 in investment, which we will spend together. Faculty from UNC is part of it. We are part of it, to work together to make sure that these things become long lasting. These are pilot projects. The government is weighing out that, will this model work or not? But we know it works. We have seen examples of it over Morehouse, Fisk, Vanderbilt. For ages, it has worked. So investments are absolutely critical. Next thing, what is critical is you need to empower your faculty to champion Black students. It is absolutely important that you do make as part of your strategic plan to diversify your own departments. Just throwing money at the problem does not work. You can bring in students, offering them scholarships, financial aids, this or that, but how will you maintain their mental, behavioral health on this campus? You have to change the grounds they walk on. You have to change the hallways they walk inside and out. And more importantly, when they graduate, you have to ensure that they're going out at places which are accepting of them. Just like you have to become accepting to them as a structural change. So leadership is important. You have to empower more leadership with that attitude, with that mission to bring about those changes structurally on your campus and put the money where it belongs. You can have as many DI, go look up how many DI committees each campus has, plenty of them. How many are funded? How many can go on from year to year to year? Very few. So leadership is one word. You have to convince your leadership that that is the direction we want to go in.
Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you to all the panelists for interesting discussion. We will now begin the Q&A session. We ask that the attendees on Zoom can begin submitting their questions in the Q&A feature. And we also request that you upvote questions that you want answered, and those questions will be considered. Attendees in the room, as I've mentioned before, can submit their questions via the tiny URL that's on the whiteboard. And of course, we're also asking that those that are in the room, we save their out loud questions for the extended discussion hour after the 4 p.m. session. After 4 p.m., we shut this down, and then there will be an extended discussion. Thank you, everyone. Sheila, Dr. Kanapa will take over from here.
Okay, thank you. So I am going to ask for a quick recital of names from the panelists with your microphones muted to see if this area microphone can pick up your voices. So that way we can all talk without taking turns. So can we start at the far end with Mohammed?
Hi, I'm Mohammed Ahmed. Can you all hear me?
Hi, I'm Roy Clark. Can you hear me?
Hello, I'm Kent Wallace. Can you hear me?
I will be the new moderator for the last bit.
I am Jennifer Weinberg-Wolf.
And I'm Zach Hall.
Oh, I should have said my name, Sheila Kanapa. All right, so I am going to jump into the Q&A and take a look at what questions we have. Some of these questions would take me a very long time to read, so I'm going to stick to some of the shorter questions. Let's see, I'm going to rank them by most upvotes. So folks who are on the webinar, please vote for your favorite questions so that we can start with those. Let's see, we have a vote for, oh wow, now it's going to be constantly changing. All right, so we have a vote for what are some steps PWIs can take to emulate the nurturing environment of HBCUs? Great question. And so I am going to direct this at Roy because he is at a PWI that has taken some steps towards nurturing.
Yeah, so we've taken some important steps, like you said. There are a number of them. So let me just pick out one or two which illustrate what we believe needs to be done and what our students have appreciated, our underrepresented students especially. One of them is the kind of creation of a family-like atmosphere in a big research university. That took place by celebrating the successes of our students. If somebody won a fellowship, we'd have a party. We meet every week, have pizza together. That was before COVID, but we'll do that again soon. Just invigorating a sense of community within our program. The other thing, which is more structural, was to have a look at the qualifier exam, which is a cause of stress in some departments and not very effective as a written exam. Students aren't really sure what they're supposed to achieve with the qualifier exam. So what we did is turn this around upside down and say, let's replace the qualifier exam with a diagnostic where, you know, all of our students are coming from different disciplines, and in some cases, sometimes have different majors, including physics. So we need to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So let's have a diagnostic to see what our students need, what else they need for their success. So we have an oral exam instead of a written exam. So it's a back and forth conversation about conceptual matters, things which should be at every physicist's fingertips, Maxwell's equations and blah, blah, blah. So let's have that kind of an interaction with our students. And that has been very successful. Still somewhat stressful to stand up in front of a few professors and have a professional
conversation about what you know, but much more effective than a written exam on standard questions, which are from the back of a book somewhere. So those are some of the things that we've done to create a more cohesive atmosphere.
Then let me hand it over to Zach for a student perspective. As a Black student at a PWI, what has worked and not worked for you in terms of a nurturing environment?
I think in undergrad for me, I felt that being just a number, I was just drifting through classes and drifting through my experience. But when I joined the APS Bridge program at Long Beach, one of their main focuses is mentoring. And I had the opportunity to meet one-on-one with faculty members, but I also had a group of faculty mentors. And to me, that let me know that I mattered in the department. It let me know that they saw me and they felt that I was an integral part of their community. So it was just a completely stark difference from undergrad, just nameless face, just the random Black guy in my class.
And were those both PWIs?
So Cal State Long Beach actually is a minority serving institution, actually.
Okay, well, so
here
you're at a
UNC,
PWI again. What can work to emulate that nurturing environment?
So here in UNC, I felt that having faculty mentors was very helpful for me, because it let me know that people who are stakeholders in our department and our research, it let me know that they valued my input and my experiences as a graduate student.
All right, anybody else want to add to that question? Otherwise, I will go on to a different question.
I would just say that majority institutions should feel comfortable asking and visiting HBCUs. Literally immerse yourself in the culture and observe what happens. But there seems to be this mindset that the HBCUs are second-tier education institutions when they are not. And so start those conversations and actually visit the HBCUs, the HSIs, and one that doesn't get mentioned very often, Indigenous universities, because I think they get overlooked far too often. Literally visit the institutions and be immersed in the culture.
Fantastic
Sheila,
insight, thank you.
I just would like to add is there's academic and non-academic part of it, and having DI committees is one issue because they're programmatic, right? They're working on achieving a particular agenda. In addition to that, I think the climate committees play a big role at PWIs. We instituted one, Robert is there, a tunnel, a climate committee, to get input from the folks around you, right? The people who you're trying to impact should have a word in how we operate, how we go about our business. So those climate committees are important, and academically, the faculty, please understand that the grades should not only include quizzes and attendances. Well, attendance is not a more UNC policy, quizzes and exams and things like that, but they also should take into account teenage pregnancies. They should also take into account health disparities. They should take into account cultural perspectives. At HBCUs and Black culture, you don't understand when your grandfather, your grandmother, your parent passes away, that the student will be away for a while.
All right.
You have to understand that.
We are nearing the end of the hour, actually. So unfortunately, I am just going to be able to ask for a very quick answer to one more question. And I guess we'll stick with one of these top three. Well, they're in a tie. All right, so let me ask, how do you build programs that last beyond their initial founder? So we have seen that there are a lot of cases where there's a single champion at a place, and maybe for 15, 20 years, it does really well, but then everything fizzles. How do you build lasting change? And I'll just take whoever raises their hand and wants to answer. All right, Roy.
Yeah, so at Michigan, we're one of the older programs that have looked into this challenge of underrepresentation. We're in our 33rd year right now, and we've had 3 leadership changes since then. And each time the current leader has had an overlap with the incoming leader for a period of about a year to sort of learn the ropes and, more important, absorb the culture of the program and the philosophy of the program, so that they understand what are the goals of this special program. So there's a kind of mentorship going on in leadership, and that's really important in continuity for the goals of the program. And we also believe that increasing the reach of the program also was really helped to sustain the effort, and more as more flavors of applied physics come into the program. This energizes the desire of some people to become leaders in this area. So there's a number of things, and it's so far over at least 3 generations of people who served for, on average, about 10 years. I served a little bit longer because I was the first founding director, but you know, 10 years is quite a commitment, and we've no shortage of people who would like to do that in the future.
Kent, I'm going to let you get the last word before we close out this webinar, because you have watched the Fisk Vanderbilt program go through a change of leadership, and that is one of, I think, the programs that other people have modeled on.
Yes. Well, I would definitely say that watching and being a part of the Fisk Vanderbilt Bridge program, it does take people on both in both institutions that are passionate about it working. Dr. Stassen, who was originally the person who was passionate about this program being successful, and then moving to Dr. Kelly Holly Bockelman, who is equally, if not more so, passionate about it working. And then, you know, the faculty members such as Dr. Arnold Berger, myself, and our faculty, Dr. Damo, Dr. Nelms, Dr. Lee Lindbergh, all of us on the Fisk University side that are really, you know, commit our resources to being successful, this program being successful. And what I would also say is, you know, you have to, at the end of the day, when you peel all the layers of the onion off, what you really find is people commit their resources to that which they value. And so you have to ask the question, what is it that you value? Or do you have people in place that value this thing that is diversity, equity, and inclusion? And if you have the people in place that value it, or you can inspire and motivate and sometimes bring them along kicking and screaming to get them to see the advantages and not think that this is a pie, that if you run out of slices, then you're the one losing. It's not a pie. You bring more to scientific discovery with representation, because their perspectives are different and they can ask new and innovative questions. And so ask that question, what do you value? And if you have the answer to that question, then you know what you can do to move the needle.
All right, that is a wonderful way to end this program. I want to thank everyone who came. I hope you are leaving inspired to make a difference, to make progress on this very important problem.